The air in my parents' living room was thick with the scent of pine and manufactured calm. It was Thanksgiving Sunday. Not the main event, but the mandatory cleanup, leftovers, and passive-aggressive review session of the past year. Everyone was here. My parents, Robert and Eleanor, sitting stiffly on the heirloom velvet sofa. My brother Lucas, radiating the smug aura of a man who just got a promotion he didn't deserve. His wife, Chloe, clutching a crystal glass of sparkling cider like it was a life raft. And then there was me, Anya. I was strategically placed in the armchair by the fireplace, the heat a comfortable foil to the chill settling in my bones. I was 32, an architect who'd spent the last 5 years building her own life, brick by painstaking brick, far away from the gilded cage of the Harrington family estate. The pretense, the reason for the meeting, we were told, was a celebratory update on my father's retirement planning. The reality, I knew, was a carefully staged performance. "Thank you all for coming," my father Robert began, his voice practiced and grave, like a CEO addressing a hostile board. "As you know, your mother and I are entering a new chapter. We've decided to transfer the ownership and management of the family trust now, rather than waiting." My mother, Eleanor, offered a tight, hopeful smile. She looked at Lucas, then back at me, her expression flickering with what might have been guilt, quickly masked. My brother Lucas cleared his throat, rising to his full, imposing height. He was wearing the custom-tailored suit he reserves for closing big deals, a shark in wool. "I have the documents right here," Lucas announced, placing a leather portfolio on the mahogany coffee table. "Dad has named me the sole trustee and executor of the estate, effective immediately. And, following the advisory restructuring, the deed to the main property, the house, the surrounding acreage, and the controlling shares in Harrington Holdings, will be transferred to my name, ensuring a stable future for the next generation of Harringtons. The house, the only true anchor of my childhood, the place that held the ghost of my grandmother, the only person who ever saw me, was being signed over. To Lucas." A stunned silence fell, heavy enough to choke on. Lucas beamed, basking in the sudden, blinding spotlight. Chloe gasped, a sound of relief mixed with victory, and instantly reached for his hand. My parents looked away from me. My father busied himself fiddling with the thermostat. My mother fixed her gaze on the ornate Persian rug, as if counting the threads. Then the noise started. It wasn't my voice, not yet. It was Chloe, who couldn't hold her joy in, starting to babble congratulations. It was my mother, launching into a nervous monologue about simplifying the lines of succession. But the real, visceral reaction came from the core of my being. It wasn't a yell, or a scream, or a tear. It was a complete, silent, and clinical assessment of the betrayal. Lucas, turning to me with a pitying smirk, added the final poisoned cherry. "Don't worry, Anya. Mom and Dad insisted that you receive a generous fixed annual allowance. It's a stipend, really, designed to ensure you're comfortable, without the burden of management. It's for the best. You always did say the business side wasn't your thing." I met his eyes. The smirk faltered. I didn't move a muscle. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even drop my gaze when the tears finally slipped down my mother's cheeks. Tears for the scene, not for the deed. I simply waited for the room to quiet, for the echoes of their selfishness to die down. When the only sound left was the crackle of the fireplace, I spoke. My voice was low, steady, and utterly devoid of emotion. "It's funny, Lucas," I said, leaning forward just slightly. "You mentioned burden. I believe the true burden lies in the details you conveniently omitted from that portfolio. My composure wasn't a defense mechanism, it was preparation. I'd been ready for this specific moment, maybe even this specific room, for decades. I wish I could say the favoritism started subtly. It didn't. From the day Lucas was born, 18 months after me, I became the shadow, the afterthought, the quiet fixture they tolerated. Lucas had won the 4th grade science fair with a volcano built entirely by my father's assistant. My reward for spending a week quietly cleaning out the basement while they worked: a new set of encyclopedias. Lucas got a dirt bike. Lucas needs stimulation, Anya, my mother had explained, tucking the heavy books into my small hands. You need to learn patience. I won the state championship for debate. I waited on the porch, clutching the trophy, for 3 hours. They were at Lucas's golf scholarship interview prep dinner. They forgot to pick me up. My father's apology the next morning? We're investing in Lucas's future, Anya. You're clever, you'll manage. The hardest truth was that they didn't actively hate me. They simply didn't see me. I was the responsible one, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who was easy to overlook. They channeled every resource, financial, emotional, temporal, into Lucas, the one who was supposed to be the glorious heir, the one who demanded their attention. But I was also the one who watched and listened. When I started my architecture firm 5 years ago, I didn't just need seed money, I needed to get out. My parents gave Lucas the penthouse apartment. They gave me a secured loan against the house's equity. While signing the papers, I asked the lending officer a throwaway question about the deed history. He chuckled and told me, "It's always smart to know what you're borrowing against, Ms. Harrington." That's when the thread snagged. I spent the next 4 years, late nights in my firm's office, not just designing skyscrapers, but digging through public property records, tax filings, and corporate registers. I was meticulous. An architect needs to understand foundations. I was checking the foundation of my family. What I found was that the Harrington foundation wasn't stone and mortar. It was built on sand and legal sleight of hand. I reached into the leather messenger bag at my feet. The bag contained a single, thin manila envelope. The sight of it alone made the color drain from Lucas's face. He knew my work bag wasn't just for blueprints. Lucas mentioned the family trust, I continued, still speaking softly. He mentioned the management and control. What he neglected to mention is the nature of the trust. I extracted a single sheet of paper, laminated, pristine, and entirely legal. It was a copy of the original Harrington Family Trust, established by my paternal grandmother, Amelia Harrington, in 1980. Grandmother Amelia was sharp, I said, holding up the paper. And she was fair. Her will stipulated that the estate, the house, the land, and the business shares would be placed into a generation-skipping trust for the benefit of all her grandchildren. The trust was designed to split evenly when the youngest grandchild turned 35, or upon the death of the surviving parent. Lucas, finding his voice, roared, "That's been superseded. It was restructured 6 years ago. Dad has the right to manage the assets." "He does." I conceded with a small nod, my eyes locked on my father, whose hands were now trembling. "But a manager is a fiduciary. He has a legal and ethical duty to act in the best interest of all beneficiaries, which, Lucas, includes me." I held up a second document, a bank record. "In the last 3 years, the main trust account has been bled dry," I stated, the number hanging in the air like an axe, $4.7 million. And it wasn't spent on business investments or property maintenance as the quarterly reports claimed. It was transferred. I slid the bank record across the polished table, stopping it precisely in front of my father. The money was routed through 3 shell corporations, all registered in Delaware and Nevis, I explained, naming jurisdictions only a corporate lawyer should know. And all 3 accounts ultimately fed into a private investment fund, set up exactly 6 months ago under a new entity, L.R. Harrington Holdings, LLC. I paused, letting the implication sink in. Lucas hadn't just been named the heir. He, with my parents' cooperation, had already started embezzling the entire principal from the trust, funneling it directly into his own company before the official transfer, thus leaving the trust empty, and me with nothing but a promised stipend from an insolvent entity. My mother made a small, pathetic, whimpering sound. My father buried his face in his hands. Lucas, though, was enraged. He surged out of his seat. "This is baseless slander, corporate restructuring. You have no idea what you're talking about, Anya." "Oh, I think I do, Lucas," I said, my voice rising for the first time, not in volume, but in terrifying clarity. Because the funds weren't just the trust principal. The original Harrington Trust was subject to a very specific and highly restrictive federal tax lien. This was the twist. The room went silent. A dramatic, heavy, absolute silence. The kind that follows a gunshot. "Grandmother Amelia," I explained, leaning back into my chair, suddenly comfortable, "was audited late in her life. She settled by placing a significant portion of the estate's liquid assets into a specialized taxable holding structure, explicitly to cover a $1.2 million deferred tax bill to be paid upon the parent generation's transfer of ownership. Your financial maneuvering, Lucas, using those shell companies and transferring the funds across state lines, constitutes several things, none of them good." I dropped the final devastating piece of evidence onto the table, a certified copy of the IRS lien. "It constitutes tax fraud, wire fraud, and grand theft," I finished, meeting Lucas's horrified, frozen stare. "And now, because the funds needed to pay the lien are gone, the entire estate, the house, the land, all the Harrington Holdings shares, are subject to immediate seizure by the U.S. government." Lucas collapsed back onto the sofa, the smugness completely replaced by terror. Just then, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed from the front door. My father, lifting his head, looked at me with a mixture of hatred and recognition. He understood. This wasn't a monologue. It was a setup. "The doorbell is being handled," I said, glancing toward the foyer. I had arranged for someone to arrive precisely 15 minutes after the meeting was scheduled to start. Enough time for the announcement, the reaction, and my reveal. A moment later, a tall, impeccably dressed woman in a charcoal suit and sensible heels walked into the living room. She carried a sleek, black briefcase and radiated the kind of quiet authority that makes even the proudest man shrink. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice smooth and professional. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I am counsel with the Federal District Attorney's Office, specializing in financial crimes and white-collar fraud. Ms. Harrington, Anya, retained my services some time ago, and more recently provided us with substantial documentation regarding the alleged mismanagement of the Harrington Family Trust and the corresponding federal tax liabilities." She didn't look at me. She looked at Robert, then Lucas. "Mr. Harrington, Mr. Lucas Harrington," Vance continued, pulling out a handful of official papers. "We have obtained a judicial order to freeze all assets tied to L.R. Harrington Holdings, LLC, and to initiate a full forensic audit of the original Harrington Trust and all individuals connected to its recent transactions." She placed 2 large envelopes on the table. Summons. "The documents your daughter provided," Vance concluded, "suggest not only a breach of fiduciary duty, but a premeditated, multi-layered attempt to fraudulently evade federal taxes and defraud a co-beneficiary. The charges, unfortunately, carry significant penalties." My parents were weeping openly now. Lucas was pale, shaking his head in frantic, silent denial. Chloe was already grabbing her purse and backing toward the door. I finally rose from my armchair. I walked over to the coffee table, picked up the laminated copy of my grandmother's original trust, and tucked it back into my messenger bag. It was the only thing I truly wanted to save from the rubble. "You said I wasn't cut out for management, Lucas," I said, looking down at him. "You were right. I'm not a manager. I'm a structural engineer, and I just blew up the foundation you thought was rock solid." I walked past my family, past the weeping, the betrayal, and the ruins of a life I was supposed to have inherited. I walked to the front door, not needing to look back. Eleanor Vance followed, the sound of her heels a final echoing gavel. The fallout was swift and brutal. My father was stripped of his fiduciary duties and is facing massive fines. Lucas is fighting a losing battle against the DA's office. The house, the golden inheritance they had weaponized against me, is now tied up in federal litigation and will almost certainly be sold to cover the tax lien and legal fees. Harrington Holdings will be dissolved. The gilded cage is gone. My mother called me last week. She didn't apologize. She asked if I could pay for Lucas's bail. I hung up. It was the easiest decision I have ever made. I didn't want the money, not really. I didn't want the house. I just wanted the truth. And I wanted justice for the 8-year-old girl who was handed a textbook while her brother got the keys to the kingdom. What I got was a clean slate, a vindication that cost me my entire family, and the quiet knowledge that I am finally, unequivocally, free. I'm on a plane right now, heading to a city where no one knows the name Harrington. I'm going to build things that are real, solid, and honest. This is where the story ends for them, but it's where it begins for me. To everyone who stuck around for this whole, messy, impossible monologue, thank you. You are the only witnesses who matter. I put it out here because I needed to know I wasn't crazy. I needed to know that someone else would see the betrayal, the rot, and the quiet strength it took to burn it all down to save myself. So, I have to ask you, the strangers, the listeners, the people who have been through their own silent battles, where are you listening from right now? And honestly, if you were in that armchair, knowing the depth of the deception and the stakes, what would you have done?